All right, so we're going to get started with exercise 122 today. I made a mistake on the handout that you guys got. It says exercise 123. Go figure. Apparently I was a day ahead. So this is exercise 122, but I didn't think it would be worth making extra copies just to change the number. So just scratch that off, and it's exercise 122. And really, I think this is one of the more important things that we discuss relating to AutoCAD. And what happens is, in another AutoCAD class, you learn a lot of the technical fundamentals of drawing in AutoCAD and fillets and radiuses and even dimensioning and things like that. But a lot of times what gets glossed over is the idea of paperspace and viewports and kind of how we really get out of the world of AutoCAD into something that we can print at a scale and ultimately have a really good, nice drawing out of it. So I'm going to talk through that today and kind of give you a good understanding of what the differences between Modelspace and Paperspace really are. And so thus far, everything that we've done is all in what's called Modelspace in the world of AutoCAD. And that is essentially full-scale drawings. So if a wall is 6 inches thick, we draw it 6 inches thick. If it's 20 feet long, we draw it 20 feet long. So everything is full size. That's great, and it makes it really easy to model because we don't have to do any kind of scale calculations in our head. But at the same time, when we go to print it, or ultimately to plot it on one of the plotters in the back or something like that, we need to be able to have it at a particular scale such that it's a readable, good quality drawing. And AutoCAD has something built into it that's called Paperspace that deals with this exact thing. It has to do with specifying a size of a page and then ultimately having viewports into your drawing that scale at a particular scale and ultimately print at a particular scale. So we can tell the fundamental difference between Modelspace and Paperspace by the color of the background. So in the world of Modelspace, we have a black background and we draw with white lines. In the world of Paperspace, we're going to have a white background and we're going to draw with black lines. And so it's a little bit different, and I'll show you kind of how that evolves over time. So if we look down, and it's hidden by my head on the screen, if we look down in the lower left corner of the screen, there's a tab called Model, and chances are that's the tab that's currently active. Next to that, there'll be a tab called Layout 1, probably, and a tab called Layout 2. Those are the defaults that are set up in AutoCAD. I used Layout 1 earlier today as part of my drawing, so I'm going to use Layout 2 instead as our example file for today. And so when I click on Layout 2, I get basically a white sheet. So if I was in model mode, or model space, it's black all the way to the edges. There's no defined piece of paper, so to speak. When I'm in a layout, I get a defined piece of paper, kind of like an InDesign file, right, where I have a page. And within that page, I have what's called a viewport that shows my drawing. And it is currently not to any particular scale, but it is shown in this viewport. Excuse me. Before we get too far into this, however, I want to set up some of the basic options that are available to me in this layout. And so what I'll do is I'll right-click on where it says Layout 2. In your case, it's probably Layout 1. And when I right-click on it, right about in the center is something called the Page Setup Manager. And the Page Setup Manager is where we get into the specific settings of this particular setup or this particular layout. So I'm on Layout 2. You guys may be on Layout 1. Again, it doesn't matter. With that active layout selected, I'm going to click on the Modify button, which is right here. And this brings up something that looks an awful lot like the Print dialog box or the Plot dialog box that you've already seen several times. Okay? Here is where I'm going to specify what the settings are for this particular piece of paper. And I'll start by picking the printer name or the plotter that I'm going to use as part of this. And instead of picking what we've been picking, this published to web JPEG, I'm instead going to pick the next one up, which is DWG to PDF. And so today is the first day that we're actually not going to be producing an image file. We're going to be producing a PDF file. And the advantage of a PDF file is that once you create the PDF file, you can hand it essentially to anybody. Anybody who has a computer can open up a PDF. So I could send it off to somebody for them to look at my drawing, and they wouldn't have to have AutoCAD, they wouldn't have to have a special viewer, nothing. They just double-click, it opens up in Acrobat or in Preview or whatever program they're using to open their PDFs, Opens right up easily. The other thing is that when it comes time to print, it's much easier to print from a PDF than it is from within any particular application. You just double click on it, say File, Print. Part of this assignment will be to actually plot your final layouts. And you're not there yet, but we will get to that. And on Wednesday, I'll talk about using both of the plotters that are in the back of the room so that you get some experience actually having to print something large, right? Instead of just our regular 8.5 by 11s or 11 by 17s. So, long story, we're going to change the printer plotter to be DWG to PDF. And then below that, we're going to specify a paper size. And so by default here, it's an 8.5 by 11 sheet. We're going to choose instead an ArcD at 24 by 36. It doesn't matter which one you choose, whether it's ArcD 36 by 24 or 24 by 36. We're going to adjust for that after the fact. So, an ArcD is 24 by 36. So the two plotters in the back of this room, one of them can print 24 inches wide and obviously can print 36 inches long because there's a roll of paper in it. The other one prints 36 inches wide and would print 24 inches long. And it'll cut the paper right off of the roll. So it really makes no difference the orientation of whether it says 24 by 36. The printer or the plotter is going to rotate it to fit on the page correctly. So my page size is ArcD. What to plot is going to be layout. And under scale, I want to leave it at 1:1. And that seems a little counterintuitive. But what I'm setting up here is the page size. So this is the actual physical print that's going to come out of the printer. So I want it to be exactly 24 by 36 inches. That's what's coming out of the printer. On the right-hand side here, I have the ability to choose my plot style table or my pen assignments. The first option down is AutoCAD.ctb. We're just going to pick that. Okay. Below that, I have quality options. For lack of something better, I'll turn that to maximum. It really won't make any difference for the line drawings that you're doing, but it is there. And the rest of these options are fine. Notice that my drawing orientation is set for landscape. That's usually, when we do a 24 by 36 sheet, it's usually 36 wide, 24 high. Oops. So that's set to 24 by 36 in landscape mode, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And when I say OK, my page gets a lot bigger. And so you suddenly see much bigger page with a much smaller viewport. So I'll go ahead and close this Page Setup Manager. And now I have a really large piece of paper, and I need to start orienting my objects or my views for this particular page. So by default, there is one viewport that shows up on this layout. And it's right here, this little rectangle. If I move it, let me go ahead and move it up. Oops, it helps if I can type. I can move it up here to the upper corner. And so these viewports are actually interactive. So it's a box, but if I double click inside of this box, I can zoom in, say, toward my floor plan. Okay? I can get out of this by double clicking outside of the box. Now, one of the things to be aware of is that if I were zoomed in such that all I saw was inside of my viewport, and I were to double click, I could zoom in and zoom out, but I can no longer double click to get out of this viewport. So you can actually get yourself stuck inside of a viewport, which is one of the quirks in getting used to it. I'll show you a workaround in a little bit so that that doesn't happen. To get out of it, I'm actually undoing so that I can get back to where I was before the zooms. So this particular viewport has a scale that's associated with it. Right now, I've just double-clicked to get inside of it, and I've zoomed in and zoomed out, and I don't exactly know what the scale is. So I need to be able to tell what this particular viewport's scale is, and I can do that by making sure that I'm outside of the viewport and then selecting the viewport. And when it's selected, I can look at my properties window. Now, you may not have your properties window displayed, because a lot of times by default it's not displayed. If I don't have it displayed, I can type properties, and it will bring up the properties window over here on the right. The other thing that sometimes happens is the properties window is actually docked to one side, and it just exists on the right side or on the left side. A lot of people prefer to leave it docked. It's really up to you, and you'll see that if you don't restart the computers, you'll have whatever the preferences are in AutoCAD of the last person who used it. So it may be docked, it may not be docked. It's really up to you. I'm going to leave it for right now undocked and just floating here on the side of the page. So when I have my viewport selected, which it is here, on the right side here we can look down under the miscellaneous selection and we can come down to standard scale, and right now it says custom. And that essentially means that I've zoomed in to some custom value and it is not really to scale. So if I click where it says custom, you'll see that I get a bunch of preset scales that are available to me. So for example, I could go a 1/16 inch equals a foot, or I could come up here to an 1/8 inch equals a foot, or I could come all the way up to a 1/4 inch equals a foot. Okay, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch equals a foot as my scale. And once it's set at a 1/4 inch equals a foot, I need to adjust the viewport so that I can see my whole floor plan. So right now it's being cut off. So I'll just use these little grips on each corner, and if I click on it, I can then move my viewport out. So it's a single click and then I move out. And then we'll tighten this up a little bit more so it's not quite so wide here. So maybe like that. A little tighter, something like that. And then I'll go ahead and use my move tool and I'll move this over so that it actually appears on the page itself. Okay? So I now have this viewport on the page. Now remember, if I were to double click inside and then use the mouse wheel to scroll in, my scale goes away. I'm no longer at 1/4 inch equals a foot anymore. Okay? So I'd have to go back, select my floor plan, come back to standard scale, and choose 1/4 inch equals a foot again. Okay? Which is a little bit annoying because you can accidentally do this. And so what I'm going to do instead is once I have my viewport set up the way I want it, right, we'll have it something like this, maybe. Okay, I'm going to come over to the properties, and the third option down says display locked no. I'm going to change from display locked no to be display locked yes. And now if I were to double click inside of my viewport and I zoom in, it just zooms in, right, and zooms out based on this particular viewport. But I'm never stuck inside of the viewport, and the scale never changes from a 1/4 inch equals a foot. Okay? So it's now officially locked, which is good. Let me zoom extents. Oops. Let me zoom all so that I can see my whole page again. Okay? So now I have my floor plan established, which is exactly what I wanted. And now I want to bring in the other views that are part of this floor plan. And so I have a couple options. One, I could take my viewport here, and I could copy it. Move it down below here, like that. And now I have a second viewport, independent of the first. I could select this viewport, unlock it, and then I could double click to get inside of it, and I could use the pan tool or the middle mouse button, and I could come down here and look for that elevation. There it is. And when I'm done, oops, there we go. Let me hit escape to get out of it, double click, and now I have this front elevation view of this particular building. Right, something like that. Now, I do have some topo lines that are going through, and I'll show you how to get rid of those in just a second. But let's concentrate on the viewports for a little bit longer. So I have 3 other views associated with this. If I want another viewport, instead of copying and pasting, I can also come up here to my ribbon. The last one is Layout. I can click on Layout, and I can choose to create a new rectangular viewport, which is right here. And when I click on New Rectangular Viewport, I can actually just draw in a viewport. And by default, it'll just zoom to fit everything that I have on my screen. Looks like if I went back to Modelspace here, way off in one corner, I have some, looks like a little floor plan that's floating there. Let's get rid of that. And I'll come back to Layout 2. Let me do this one more time. I'll go to the Layout ribbon, click on Rectangular Viewport, and I'll draw a rectangular viewport. And again, I get a little preview. I can double click and I can zoom in so that I can see, say, this elevation. Okay? Now there's a little bit of a problem because this elevation is on the side. Okay? And the good news is with AutoCAD 2016, they introduced a new feature so we don't actually have to use what I wrote in the little handout for you to use. So we used to have to use a command called mvSetup to rotate this view. We don't have to do that anymore. Instead, we can just take our viewport and use the regular rotate tool Here it is. And I can rotate around this point. Let me turn on ortho. And now my view has rotated. Okay? So I haven't, in Modelspace, done anything. I still have my same orientation. I still have my reflecting lines. I could, for example, turn on my guides. There they are. There's my reflecting lines so that everything lines up correctly. All of that still exists. But if I'm in the layout mode, right, this particular building has been rotated to one side. Okay? So let me go ahead and adjust the viewport here. Drop this down a little bit closer. There it is. We go ahead and move this over, and then we'll move it down like that. Okay, so I have this elevation that's now been established. I do want to make sure that this scale is correct, which it currently isn't. So I'm going to come over to scale and make sure that it's in 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. And we'll go ahead and adjust this viewport a little bit more, like that. So at this point, I could copy this viewport, or I could create a new viewport. Again, it's up to you. I'll go to the Layout ribbon, click on Rectangular, and I'll create another box. There it is. Let me double-click, and I'm going to zoom in on this elevation now. And again, I have to rotate it. So let me take this, rotate, and now it's in its correct orientation. We go ahead and move. And we'll move again. There it is. I have to make sure that this scale is correct, so I'll select the viewport. And again, adjust my scale to be 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. And I'll do this one last time with a rectangular viewport. Go from here to here. And this time, it's for this side elevation right there. And so let's take this, and I will rotate again. So I'll go back to my home ribbon, click on the rotate button, and we'll rotate. There it is. Let me go ahead and change the scale to be 1/4 inch equals a foot. And there it is. And I'll go ahead and I'll move this up onto my layout there as well. So generally, when you're starting to do these kinds of layouts, let's zoom all to see everything. When you're starting to do these kinds of layouts, again, I should make sure that these are all locked now. So let's come over here. Display locked will be set to yes. And it's nice to have some correspondence between various views. So generally speaking, the south elevation is always going to go below the floor plan so that the two line up nicely. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and move this, but I'd like for this corner of the building to match up with that corner of the building. So I can actually stick them on top of each other and then move them again down about like that. Okay? And they overlap just a little bit, so let's make sure that they don't overlap by adjusting the boundary here. There we go. Okay, so those two line up nicely. It would be nice if these lined up a little bit better. So let's take this, and I want the roof here to line up with the roof there. So I'll move. And unfortunately, it's being rather difficult. Let's see if we can move it down. Now, I'll move it on top of itself, and then we'll move it over like so. So those line up so that the roofs are the same. And it would be nice if these started to line up reasonably similar on one side. So we'll go ahead and move them such that maybe this comes over. Let's move this up. About there. And let's move this one over a little bit more too. Like that. Okay, so this one's still a little bit long, so we'll adjust that as well. Okay, so now I have my floor plan and I have my viewports set up on this particular drawing. If I went to plot it, right, and I click on preview, I can get a sense of what it's going to look like. So there it is. Okay, but I have boxes around each of my viewports, and the boxes aren't really even, and it doesn't really look that good. Okay, so what I'd like is for this border on all of these to go away. And so I'll hit escape to go back, and then cancel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. So I'll go to Layer Properties, and I'll create a new layer. And this time, on my new layer, I'll call this No Print. Okay, you may already have a No Print layer. You can use that layer. And I'm going to make sure it's checked for No Print, and I'm also going to turn the color to green. For whatever reason, I have a tendency to make my No Print layers green. It just helps my brain. Okay? So now I'll take all of these viewports, and I'm going to change their layer to be on No Print. And it sounds a little weird that you would do this, right? But what this does is it doesn't make the viewport itself non-printing. It just takes the border and makes that non-printing. So if I were to go to plot right now and preview, those borders have now gone away. So I have just floating drawings. I have the plan, and I have each of the elevations just kind of floating there, which is what I want. Now, in these views, I have those nice diagonal contour lines that are really kind of interfering with my elevation views. And so I'd like for those to go away. And one of the great things about each viewport is that it's completely separate from the other viewports. So what I can do is I can zoom in here, I can double click on this particular viewport, and I can control which layers are visible and not visible on just this viewport. So if I come up, again I have double click so I'm inside the viewport, and I can come up to my layers, and I can choose to turn off, for example, the guides, and I'll do that by clicking the sun with the rectangle next to it. So the guides are now off, and I can also come down to topography and turn the topography off. And so now, on this particular view, I don't have those guides and I don't have the topography anymore. I'll double click on this next view, and once again, I'll go up to the layer drop downs, I'll turn off the guides, and I'll turn off the topography. And now that view is clean. Move down, guides, oops, topography, and now that view is clean. Last view over here, we'll turn off the guides and the topography. There it is. Okay, so in all of those, I got rid of that. Now on this view, I want the guides turned off, but not the topography. So I'll double click, and I will turn off the guides, but I'll leave the topography on. So now, if I went to go ahead and print or plot, and then I went to preview, we'd say all of my views set up nicely with no borders around them, right, such that they're floating in space. And so now I have my floor plan and I have my views, which is exactly what I was trying to do. The views went from being folded out to being all with the bottom down, okay, like this. And I have a really nice layout. I probably need to do a few little adjustments. Like this elevation view feels like it needs to move over a little bit to me. That might have been too much. Maybe like that. And it also feels like it needs to move down just a little bit. Move it down a little bit. And again, I'll go to print. And I keep using this preview to see exactly what my drawing is going to look like. Okay? So that looks exactly as I want it to look, and I'm happy with it. I'll go ahead and hit escape and then cancel. And so now that I have my drawing established, one of the great things about this is this layout lives independently of whatever the content is. If I decided I wanted something different, let's say I wanted to hatch the floor of the outside patio, right? I could come back into my model space, I could zoom in, I could do a hatch, right? I could pick this as my point, and let me adjust the scale, whatever it is. Oops, that was not what I wanted to do. Let's try that one more time. There. Okay, so now I had this, whatever the flooring was, there it is. That will then correspond in the updated view over here. So do you guys see how that, whatever I do in Modelspace, ends up just naturally populating to the viewports? Okay, I'm going to come back to Modelspace. I didn't really want that, but you get the idea. So it's something that once you have the layout set up, you're free to continue changing your drawing, but the layout's always going to remain consistent. The orientation's going to remain consistent. So it's a really good way of starting to set up your drawing, and it's something that if you do early on, you can then make multiple versions of this as you continue to update your files. So in terms of posting for today, what I'm looking for is this layout, 24 by 36, all of your elevation views and your floor plan on it. Okay? And then you're going to make a PDF and upload that PDF document. So it won't be a nice image file. You could do an image file if you wanted in addition to the PDF. But I'm looking for the link to the PDF file as your exercise 122. We will then, next class, take this PDF and we'll open it up in Illustrator and we'll do some collage work over the top of this. So really today's your last day to work on the building and to get this view set up, and then we'll start kind of adapting it and working forward from there. Okay? So this is what I'm looking for at the end today. If you have questions, let me know. I want these to be to scale with no borders. All right, looking something like the end product here when I go to print. Looking something like this. Okay? We'll talk about title blocks. We'll talk about text. We'll talk about notes. We'll talk about collage. We'll talk about color backgrounds. We'll talk about all that stuff next class as part of the Illustrator section. Are there any questions? No? So you have a little bit of extra time if you haven't finished your actual elevation views and your floor plan. You have a little bit of time to work on that. I should also point out that notice that when I set up a line type, so in this case I have a phantom line here for my contours. Looks like these are mistakes. They shouldn't be phantom lines. But all of those things, the hidden lines that I use for the cabinets, all of that is now showing up as part of this. Right? So remember before, some of you asked me, wait a minute, I chose to make a line hidden and it hasn't shown up yet. When you do this layout and you have your scale drawing, those line weights will and line types will show up. Okay? All right, I'll turn you loose.
Did you trim all the topo lines within the...
Yes, so I did. I trimmed all of the topo lines within the floor plan, and I also, if we jump back for a second, let me go into Modelspace. It just didn't look like there was enough density of topo lines, so these were the topo lines that I gave you, and I went in with the spline tool and I drew some extra topo lines. So I divided it up. Instead of every foot, I now have one every 3 inches, just so that the end product looked a little bit nicer. Right? So I added some of those topo lines, which is something that you can do if you want to. You don't have to. Okay? Any other questions? For everybody or for just you? Okay, I'll come there in just a second.